Well, howdy, y'all. Thanks for coming and checking another Tales from the Bush. Uh, you know, I always appreciate everybody coming back and seeing my life's work, my time on the field and out in the bush. This right here was a car that a friend of mine had. Well, he became a friend of mine. I sold a Superbird for him, and he had a Panther Pink 70 Cornet RT. Couldn't get pictures of that. But this right here is a 1970 446 pack Shaker Hood Cuda numbers matching car. He took the car all apart, and he was having some problems with life and stuff, and never really got very far with the car. I think the car had been repainted, and he was trying to put it back together, and stuff happens. And but the cool thing is, this car was super solid. It was a numbers matching 446 pack Shaker Hood Cuda, and it was just a beauty. It was a beauty to take a look at this car and take the pictures. It was a bucket seat automatic car, but it didn't matter how these cars came; they were what they were. And this was definitely a six-pack Shaker Hood Cuda. And I just, I wish I would have done something with it. It's actually, to this day, 25 years later, it's still sitting in the same pole barn, collecting dust. I might try to go back and pick it up a little bit later, but, so here, I think this was 2000. There's the VIN number right there. This was in 2000. And if I remember right, he wanted 50 grand for that car. I should have grabbed it. It's just one of those things that I realize now that I couldn't grab everything. I just really couldn't grab everything. I really should have grabbed this car. But in 2000, I thought it was just another car that I was looking at. So now we're getting into this Superbird. To be honest, I can't remember where this came from. I believe this was a guy that had this car. He had emailed me and said, he wanted to sell it. I think he only wanted 60 grand for it at the time. Factory sublime green car. And boy, she was rough. There was no question that this car was rough. To be honest with you, I think if anybody tried to put this Superbird on a trailer, it would probably break in half. But aside from the fact that the motor had been taken out of the car for whatever reason, big old smash in the front end there, this car was untouched. It looked like it was a hoop-de-doop car back in the day and just a regular street racer, but the car had been untouched. But you can paint these cars and overpaint these cars and do what you want, but you can't hide that right there. That is factory sublime green paint. And, the car was pretty straight. You take a look at that back quarter panel, boy, that trunk and quarter panels and all that stuff was just, it rotted all to hell. Was the car worth saving? Well, it's a Superbird. Of course you're going to save it. Was it rough? Oh, Jesus, yeah, that car was rough. And it didn't have the motor and transmission in it, so that's not helping you right there. Could you find the motor and transmission? Not likely. I mean, this car was sitting at a wrecking yard. You're not going to find that motor and transmission anywhere. But aside from that, everything was there. So it's one of those tough situations that if I had picked this car up, I remember I turned this car down. You get somebody who dug a hole in the damn console for a drink holder. But, I believe I turned this car down because it was just too rough for me. So now we're getting into a pretty cool car. This car was actually part of this doctor's collection that I had told you that this preacher guy was selling. This was a 1970 446 pack Super. And she was a beauty. Now, if you had seen the video I had done before, all this guy's cars were untouched. This guy was adamant about buying cars that were completely untouched. He was smart enough to do this stuff back in the 80s when nobody really thought much about it. We were all just driving them every day, but this was a completely untouched car. And I know it's hard to believe. I know it's hard to believe because it's so clean looking. This car was detailed up, cleaned up. Look at that. How is that trunk pan so beautiful? This car has to be restored. There's no question this car has to be restored, but it wasn't. The car wasn't restored. anybody's going to look at this car, they're going to point out the nicks and knacks and this and that. Yes, there was some stuff done to the car. Obviously, that's new weather stripping around that trunk. But look at that interior. Bench seat, automatic on the column. Boy, I love what people did. When you were in that sales office back in the 70s and you were checking off those boxes, I don't know what some of these people were thinking, but good golly. I mean, I was old enough in the 70s to kind of remember these cars, but bench seat, automatic on the column, 446 package. Wow. That'd have been so cool to drive this car around back in the day. Look at how clean that interior is. Look at that steering wheel. This hat. But if you look at the wear on the steering wheel, you can see. And the wear on the gas pedal and stuff. This car's been detailed up. It's been cleaned up. It's been sponged up. It's been bathed up. But this car was untouched. You can tell by the carpet. You can tell by the buttons on the radio and stuff. The guy just had a damn eye for buying these cars untouched, unrestored. And he made it his thing to make sure that he bought the cars this way. Again, this was part of that collection the preacher had. It was all these doctor's cars. Gosh, it was so cool to document these cars, knowing that these cars were completely untouched. And you know when you're looking at these cars, that thick paint and stuff, you know, this was another example. At this point in my career, even though I had gotten a pretty good name for myself and that, I wasn't really quite familiar with all these Mopars. I knew about cars, I knew about documenting cars, checking motors and VIN numbers and all that stuff, but it wasn't until I met this guy and saw all these high-end Mopars that I knew what was happening. These cars were just so cool and so crazy to look at, you know, just completely untouched cars. And look at the lines on that car. And you gotta remember, when I was taking these pictures with, it was top of the line digital camera at the time, but it was a crappy camera. It really was. But that car's just straight as an arrow. I always loved those hood scoops. I wish those things would have been functional. But on these cars, the cool thing is, they actually were functional. But you know, the darts and demons and stuff like that, they were non-functional. I wish it would have transferred over to the B-bodies, because that was a factory N96 air grabber car. Look underneath that car. Anybody looking at the undercarriage of that car is going to say, yeah, that's been restored. It's too shiny. But look at that transmission. Look at the underneath of the steering rods there and stuff, how they're all chipped up. That's not from a car that was restored and somebody drove it for a little while. It's not. I know that they didn't do a perfect underspray of that car and clear the car out like that, but I'm telling you, no matter what anybody says, I know this car was unrestored. That's not the factory exhaust. Obviously, new exhaust has been put on it. But at the end of the day, to me, the car had not been unrestored. It was a little tough in some of the situations. Like, they just didn't do this in the factory. You know, the more I look at this car, the more I realize, you know, this is 20 years later. The car was sold as an unrestored car. I didn't sell it, but the car was sold as an unrestored car. But I'm going to switch right up here. I'm going to switch it up right here. They didn't do the cars like this from the factory. They didn't fully paint underneath the car. So I'm changing things up. This car's been restored. 100%. This car's been restored. So, I can't say forget about everything I said so far about this Super Beep, but I'm going to tell you right now, here I am 20 years later, a lot more experience, a lot more knowledge, and I'm telling you this car's been restored. But let's just go with, okay, so it's been restored, and it got driven a little bit. At the time that I was out there, I just didn't know a lot. This is I think I did another video on this. I call this guy the Snake Man. He had some cars. Now, this was a 1970 440 4-speed Super Beat. Can't remember. I'm pretty sure I bought this car, but I remember driving this car around the guy's yard. He told me it runs and drives. Looks like shit, but it runs and drives, and it did. I drove it around the guy's yard, and it was a really cool car. Obviously, that gull wing doesn't go on the back of it, but you know, this guy had some cars that. This is probably the one time in my career that I kicked myself in the ass for not picking up these cars, because he had some pretty cool cars out there. Well, I like to call him the Super B man, because that's all he had was Super Bs. You know, not super rare cars, but he had, he had a 446 pack Super B. And this was the place that I found the first Super B ever made. That was the prototype car, 1968 426 Hemi 4-speed car, the prototype car. I got into a lot of crap with that car. Dodge was not happy with me about finding that car, because the car had been stolen, sold off at a police auction, and supposedly it didn't exist, but it did. So I can tell you right now, that's in another video. You can check that out just a little bit later on, if you want. But look at that, look at that hoopty-doop steering wheel. That still blows me away that somebody could drive with that thing. She was rough, but she was 100% complete. Car had never been taken apart. Everything was there. And I actually drove it around the yard with that little steering wheel. And boy, that was rough. That car was rough. I appreciate you coming by and checking on Tales from the Bush.